and I'm the Northeast Regional Coordinator of the Indiana State Library's Professional Development Office. I will be the host and question moderator for today's webinar, Step Up Your Library Signage, presented by Dr. Curtis R. Rogers, Communications Director of the South Carolina State Library. A few housekeeping items before we start. If you are having sound issues during the webinar, please see the sound issues box just below the chat box. If there is a global sound issue, we will announce it in the chat box. If you are unable to resolve the sound issue you are experiencing, we are recording the webinar and you can watch it offline after it is ended. For questions, we will hold questions till the end around 10:50 for the Q&As. So if you have a question, just type it in the chat box on the upper left side of the screen. The session today is worth 1 LEU and your certificate will be available for download at the end of the webinar. If you are watching an archived recording of this presentation, information on how to obtain your LEU is in the video's description in YouTube. So after the webinar has been transcribed, it will be available on the Indiana State Library's archived webinars page. For weekly updates on upcoming trainings and to learn more about what's happening in libraries across the state, please subscribe to the Indiana State Library's e-newsletter, The Wednesday Word, and check our continuing education website for other professional development opportunities. Okay, let's get started. I am now happy to turn the presentation over to Dr. Rogers.
Thank you so much. It's certainly a pleasure to be with you all today, and hopefully you can hear me loud and clear, and hopefully you're seeing my PowerPoint presentation okay. Just having a nice little chat with someone who is from a small town in South Carolina called Loris, and I've actually been there. So South Carolina is a neat state. I've grown up here, and always enjoyed being here. So if you ever get a chance to come to Columbia, South Carolina, and you want a tour of the South Carolina State Library, I will be more than happy to give it to you. Thank you again for inviting me to present about library signage. I'm going to go through my presentation today, and just to give you a little bit of an outline, I will let you know about my library signage philosophy and talk about how I got started becoming so passionate about library signage. Also, we'll do a Library Signage 101 with some of the basics, and we'll go through something called a plus delta with some real library signs, and I will be talking to you about the positives and the changes that you can make in your library signage. We'll also talk a little bit about customer service issues as they relate to library signage. And then we will look at equipment and resources. And like we said at the beginning, I will take Q&A at the very end, but you can go ahead and feel free to type in comments as you have them in the chat box. Or if you want to discuss the signs, you're welcome to discuss them amongst yourself. Oh, I see Beth has said hi from the Union County Public Library. It's funny because I actually got my start at the Union, South Carolina County Public Library. But anyway, I just want to talk a little bit about some of these signs. And by the way, all of these signs that I'm showing you are real library signs. These are signs that I have either found or people have sent me images of. Or I have taken a picture of at a library in South Carolina. And actually, I have done 76 library signage audits in South Carolina, and it's something that's fascinating. I've done them at both academic and public libraries. But anyway, if you look at this sign, before we move to the next slide, one of the things that I think about when I see this, I don't kind of see this as a professional looking sign. It's not something I would see in a bank or in a department store, but at the same time, it's also fun. And it depends on your community. You all know your communities, and you know what your community would appreciate or maybe would think is fun or maybe would think is not professional looking. So everything that I'm going to be talking about is subjective. You all know your communities. You know how your library systems work. Some of you may have a PR and marketing coordinator. You may have certain rules you have to abide by. So those are all things to think about when you're thinking about library signage. So this is part of my library signage philosophy. One thing that I want you to do is to really think critically about your library signage and what it means. Also, a big part of my philosophy is less is more. If you ever came to the South Carolina State Library and you walked in, you would not see a lot of signs. My philosophy is people are going to ask a question to another human being before they're going to stand and read a long sign or a verbose sign. So that's something to think about as well. Also think about comparing the signage in your library to signs you see when you're out shopping, or if you're at the doctor's office, or if you're at the bank, or at some other retail location. And think about how your library signs compare to wherever else you are. And start looking critically at other signs. Do they have branding? If you go into a department store, you're most likely going to see that department store's brand on just about everything you come into contact with. So I'll be showing signs of real library images, or I said that completely backwards. I'll be showing images of real library signs. So anyway, here's a sign that many of us have maybe seen in a library, and one of the things that I think about when I look at this sign is it kind of is hard to read. The font is a little bit difficult, and I see clip art, and one of the things I think about when I see clip art is I kind of think it's a little antiquated. But again, it's a personal preference. I also look at the apostrophe S, and being sometimes a grammar nerd, as I think a lot of library folks tend to fit into that category, I see that CDs isn't possessive, and it probably doesn't need an apostrophe. One of the things I always think about when I look at signs that have DVDs or CDs and there's an apostrophe, I think, that doesn't need an apostrophe. But anyway, that's one of the things that you too can think about when you're looking at your own library signs. Okay, so moving on. How it all started. One of the things that I've really thoroughly enjoyed in my career, and by the way, I have worked here at the South Carolina State Library for 25 years, but have worked in libraries of some type since way back before that. So I've been in the profession for about 32 years. But one of the things that I have really gotten the most out of is the Library Marketing Communications Conference, which you can see here. I just updated this slide so that you could see when the next one is. It is November 13th and 14th, 2019 at the Hyatt Regency in St. Louis, Missouri. So I encourage everyone to go to the librarymarketingconference.org website and learn all about that conference, and hopefully I will see some of you there. But anyway, years ago at this conference, I attended a session called Do You See the Signs? Evaluating Language, Branding, and Design in a Library Signage Audit. And this was by Amy Stempler and Mark Aaron Polgar. And they really laid out for the group who was attending their session everything you need to think of. And it really took hold into my thought process of what I need to be thinking about when I am looking at not only our library signs, but when I'm out in the field. And as you know, state library staff hopefully are able to get out and about and visit libraries in their state. But what I like to do when I go out to a library, and if they request for me to do a signage audit, is to really look at everything very critically. And sometimes that's hard to do when you see the same signs over and over every day in your own library. So think about trying to look at your library signage through a different lens. So just to give you a little bit of an overview of library signage, kind of some of the basics, there are some positive things to remember and some negative things to remember. So first off, with the positive column, you always want to use polite language. You don't want to be too verbose, and this is one of the things that I always find difficult because I know even myself as a librarian, I tend to want to be as uh, I just want to say everything that needs to be said. So what I need to do is cut out a lot of words because a lot of people don't want to stand there and just read a long sign. They want you to get to the point and want to know what they can do and what they shouldn't be doing. One of the other things that's very important is that pretty much just about every sign you should have in your library needs to have your library logo and consistent branding. Um, but I put here that it depends because it depends. I mean, you might have a teen reading program, and it's maybe a poster, and maybe it's all about a certain topic, and it's inside the library. So you maybe don't need your library logo. Um, but usually most every sign, in my opinion, is going to warrant having your consistent branding and your library information on it. Also, you want to stray away from typos. Be sure and get someone else to read your sign before you put it up. You're going to want to use correct grammar. And you're also going to want to think about font and font size, and also an image that supports content. One thing about font and font size that I will mention is that we actually have a communications guide here at the State Library so that all of our staff knows what font family we're supposed to be using, what font size is appropriate for what document, and also our official colors. That's part of our logo. So those are things you want to think about as well. Then here in the negative column, don't put up any signs that are handwritten. It makes it look like you didn't have time to, print out a sheet of paper. But what else does it say? Does it look professional if something is handwritten? Also, you don't want to have too many words. Again, people are not going to stand there and read a sign that is a paragraph long. It's just something that people do not do. In fact, I have a little story. I was at a county public library branch here in South Carolina. That was one of the larger branches. And they had a copier machine. It was a very busy branch. And I stood and watched a few people at the copier. And they had 3 signs on the wall. And they were very verbose. Number 1, do this. Number 2, do this. Number 3, if this doesn't work, do this. And the people that I saw at the copier machine didn't look at the signs at all. They went right over to the desk and asked a human being for help. So a lot of times you can think about those, long drawn out signs as something that you might need to get rid of, or think about taking them down if it's something that's not working. Clip art, just don't do it. And I also have, unless it's, maybe you're doing some kind of program that warrants clip art. A lot of times there are some images that can be considered clip art or icons that you might want to use in a sign. It might be a Wi-Fi symbol or something like that. That is kind of a universal symbol. So just think clearly about clip art. Try not to use the little stick figure people. That's kind of one of the things you see in the literature that's not being used that much anymore. Also, another no-no is using Comic Sans or the Papyrus font. Those are a couple that people tend not to use. However, if you're doing maybe a fun sign or a little poster or something about maybe a workshop on graphic design and you want to make an impact, then certainly use those fonts to get your point across. It really depends. Also, one of the things that I see a lot when I'm doing signage audits are passive-aggressive signs, and we definitely want to stay away from passive-aggressive language, telling people they can't do this, they can't do this, they can't do that, and then saying, thank you, management, or thank you so much for being here. And you also want to consider tone. You want to think of all these kinds of things when you're looking at a library signage. You also don't want to have too many colors, and you don't want to have too much going on. Sometimes that can really distract from the message that you're trying to send. Okay, so here is an image. What you see here before you is a lot of stuff going on. This was at a at a library I was doing a signage audit for, and you can see over to the right in the image there's a stairwell, and so there's stairs going up to the second floor. And so I kind of stood over to the side for a few minutes and watched people come in and out of the library. And I watched people, maybe about 10, 12 people going into the stairwell and going up the stairs. I did not see a single person stop in front of this door and look at any of the signs. The signs are very long, they're very different, they are kind of confusing. And what's the first thing you think of when you see something like this with, 6 signs and a poster? It kind of is overwhelming, and you don't want to look at it. You just kind of want it to go away. So one of the things after I had done the signage audit at this library was that they ended up taking down all the signs because they didn't, they just walked by it every day, and they would just either add another sign or take down a sign. So it's something that you have to think about critically. Are people stopping and reading your library signs? Is it too much? And what would happen if you took any of the signs away? Here's another sign that I saw in a men's restroom in a very small branch. And it's one of those signs that you can tell has been there for quite some time because there are no windows in this restroom, and so there is no sunlight getting in to fade the paper, but you can see that the paper has been there so long it is actually faded. And what I do like about this sign is that someone has, done little hand-drawn corners to frame the wonderful image. But, this is kind of something that you need to think about. Is this something that is in any of your restrooms? Do you have any kinds of other signs that you maybe have forgotten about? If you have an all-female staff, which we tend to have a lot of females in the profession, is someone checking the men's restroom? So think about all of those kinds of things when you're thinking about signage. Okay, and here is another issue that I consistently see in a lot of libraries. And actually, when I do not see a bulletin board, it makes me really happy. But most of the time I do see a bulletin board, and most of the time it looks like this. Bulletin boards are very difficult. Some of you, I'm sure, have bulletin boards, maybe that the public can use, or if you're an academic library, maybe, part of the student union or something. But, you really have to keep tabs on these. You have to have a good staff member who's in charge of consistently looking at the bulletin board. And sometimes the bulletin boards can look good when they're cleaned up, but a lot of times, really think critically about, is anyone standing in front of this bulletin board and looking at all of the stuff that's on it? And I say stuff because you see there's business cards. It looks like there's something that people can take rip off the bottom and get a phone number for. But if your bulletin board is near the circulation desk, maybe think about asking your circulation staff to look critically and, kind of maybe 2 or 3 times a week, spend a few minutes just observing and seeing whether or not people are actually stopping at a bulletin board to look at anything, because, maybe there's something else you could do with the space. So, and also, if you notice on this sign, there's a long explanation about what the hand sanitizer station is. And, one of the things that you have to think of is, what do you need to explain versus what do you not need to explain? For instance, restroom is the restroom. Hand sanitizer, I think pretty much everybody knows what it is and how to use the hand sanitizer. So a lot of things don't need signs. We tend to want to explain everything, but also think about your real estate and what you are talking about. Okay, sometimes less is more. That's my consistent philosophy. Um, just walk around your library and try to look at it through a different lens. Also, think about getting a friend or family member to come in to your library branch and ask them to look at all of the signs and let you know what is confusing or maybe, why do you have this? Also look at when a sign was posted. Sometimes I went to one library, just tell you quickly, and I had them do their own signage audit as part of an exercise. And someone came back out as we were talking about it later and said, I found a sign in our staff lounge on the bulletin board that not only was it posted by someone years ago who has since retired, but also has passed away. And, it wasn't a piece of information that anybody needed anymore. So you can actually throw away signs and weed them and take them down. Okay, so let's do something called the plus delta. If any of you have ever heard of this, it's a little exercise that you talk about what you find positive about something and then what you would change about something. So what we're going to do is look at these library signs, and then we're going to talk about what you like about these signs and then what could be changed about these signs. And you can feel free to use the chat area to talk about what you like and what you would change. But the important thing about doing a plus delta is to first, because it's very difficult to think of a positive, sometimes we always want to be negative or think about what could be done differently. But let's think about what's positive about each sign and then what could potentially be changed about each sign. So I will jump in right here. This is the first sign, and it's talking about help keep your library quiet, clean, and comfortable. Follow these 3 rules of etiquette. Number 1, no food allowed in the library. Number 2, no drinks at computer stations, the circulation desk, the meeting, and student study rooms. Number 3, be quiet. The library is a quiet study space. Your fellow students appreciate your support. So what do you like? What's a positive about this library sign? And so we've got folks saying that it's large, clear, to the point, 1 or 2 fonts used. The font is large. Yes, it's a nice size. It's kind of a nice color scheme. There are a lot of colors going on, but it's in a certain family. Very large and easy to read. Yep, colors, kind of nice. I like the library and your library quiet phrase. All the information's on one poster and not multiple posters. So we have a lot of positives that are about this. What would you change about this sign? Because if you look at this sign and think of anything that could be changed, and yes, there's no logo. I would add the library's logo so that you would have branding. Change the message to what you can do instead of just being negative and saying no food, no drinks, and be quiet. I agree that there is a lot of negativity going on. So there's a lot of things that can be done with this sign. And, you have to think through, also there are a lot of fonts going on. Also, the little statement at the end, your fellow students appreciate your support. That's probably something that could be taken off. But yeah, too much going on visually, maybe some bullet points. So all kinds of stuff we could do with that. And someone is asking, is that last statement passive aggressive? Yes, it can tend to be taken as a little bit passive aggressive because you're saying all this no stuff at the beginning and then at the very end, but it's like, oh, but we appreciate your support. So just think critically about all of the kinds of things in a sign. Okay, let's go on to the next one. The clock is ticking. Clock and ticking are underlined and bold. There's an exclamation point. Each patient has 60 underlined and in red minutes on the computer. Please underline, monitor your time, exclamation point. And then we have some clip art. And then need more minutes, tell a librarian, exclamation point. So again, thinking about the positives. What is positive about this sign? And yes, the point of the sign is very clear. But what is good about this sign? I mean, you do understand, I mean, the user thoroughly understands what the sign is about. That's a positive. The font and size is easy to read. Thank you. Yes, that's positive. It's to the point. It actually screams at you. Yes, that's true. It does scream at you. It does sound like someone is shouting. Let's look about what we can change about this sign. How could you make this sign a little bit maybe friendlier? What are some of the things you would change about this sign? Yes, I see someone saying get rid of the graphic. Also, 3 less exclamation points. You really don't need exclamation points in your signs at all. So that's something to kind of stay away from. Take off the clock is ticking. Get to the point. 50 words or less. Get rid of the clock. Too much underlining. Address the topic more. Maybe start by making the computer time usage the big statement, and below add the time and information. Something like need more time? See staff. So yes, there's a lot you can change about this sign to make it friendlier and less like you're being shouted at. Okay, here's another one. Let's talk about this one. This computer is for printing only in all caps, and it's in green with the black font, exclamation point, no internet in red, allowed on this computer. And then very nicely, thank you, in a different font at the bottom. So what do you like about this sign? And so you have to actually think, is there something that you like about this sign? Easy to read, clear message. Yes, easy to read and clear message. Those are positives. And thank you is a positive. Also, that can sometimes come across as passive-aggressive, but what would you change about this sign? It needs margins. That's interesting. Thank you for that. I don't think I've heard anyone comment about the margins on this sign before. Somebody's saying, I like nothing about this sign. The green needs to go. Sometimes you have to think about if someone has a visual impairment, what color combinations actually go well. And this is one of those examples that the printing only part is very difficult to read for someone who may have a visual impairment. And also if someone has a red-green color blindness, they're not going to see the green or the red. So those are things you need to think about as well. And we're getting lots of folks commenting, yes, no internet allowed. It does kind of seem to be odd to state that no internet allowed on this computer. You know, if you don't want people to access the internet on that computer, there are IT, you know, methods to suppress accessing internet. So this probably speaks to maybe a larger issue that is going on. Okay, let's go on to the next sign. Please read exclamation point in red, stop sign, and then do not enter, and then traffic light, and then stop here, and then employees only, 5 exclamation points, all in caps and in red. And then at the bottom, only disabled users are allowed to use the bathroom beyond this point. And also I want you to notice on the left-hand side, it is kind of ripped a little bit, and you can see the tape, and you can see it's 2 kind of 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper put together. So let's talk about what is positive. What is a plus about this sign? It is large, yes, that could be considered a positive. It does catch your eye. Yes, thank you. Very eye-catching. Stop sign is universal. Yes, that's true. Because it is something that makes you look. But let's talk about what you could change about the sign. What would you do to maybe get your point across? It is very wordy. It does make you wonder what's beyond that point. There, we have a sign here at the State Library that says "Do not touch," and it's on in a staff area, and it's on one of the thermostats. And I literally just touch it every day, just because it says not to touch it. I would simply say employees only. Yes, staff only or employees only. Obviously, they have some issue about ADA and maybe bathroom use, but maybe there's a different way to give that information out. And so, yeah, I'm glad a lot of you are talking about what you would do to change these kinds of signs, because this is what I want you to do. I want you to think critically about all of the signs in your library and maybe look at them through a different lens. And the reason why we're looking at these images is because it makes you look differently at a library sign. If you're just walking around your library, take pictures of all the signs, then actually go back to your computer and look at them. Or look at them on your phone, because looking at them out of context is also giving you a different thought process about what the sign means. So that's why I always talk about sharing images of signs is important. Okay, so let's go ahead and move on. What I'm going to do is talk to you about the library signage audit, and this is something that I started doing here a couple of years ago in South Carolina. And going out and about, like I mentioned earlier, I've gone to 76 different libraries and branches in the state and taking photos of every single sign. And then I compile a visual report, and I talk about what's working well, and I talk about what to consider changing. So I kind of do that same plus delta philosophy. I look at, even, outside, is the shrubbery nice? I look at maybe is there a smoker's area, all that kind of stuff. And I include some of that in the signage audit report. And over here on the right, you can see this is a screenshot or just what the cover image of one of these audits looks like. And this is for a small branch in Oconee County, which is up in the mountains of South Carolina, way up in the northwest corner of the state. And this is one of the small branches called the Salem Library. And so I'll just go through and show you just a few of the pages of what the signage audit looks like. I use all the images from the library that I'm visiting and kind of go through all of the things that we've already gone through, looking at the positive aspects of what's supposed to be in a library sign and also some of the negative. And I also talk about exterior considerations. Are these all of the kinds of things that you need to be looking at? Is the entrance to the building clearly marked? Is this a building you would be proud to bring your friends and family to? All of those kinds of questions that can help you think through what's going on well with your library and what you need to think about changing. So we also talk about different things to consider. Does every staff member have business cards? Are printed materials grammatically correct and spell checked? Is there a style guide for the library? How are media communications handled? Also looking at, things like, are the restrooms clearly marked and kept clean? Are the floors and carpet cleaned frequently? And when you think about communications and customer service, there's even the thought process of how is the library listed in a Google search? Has anyone reviewed the library? So you need to think through these different kinds of things and, answer these questions as best you can so that you can give the best customer service to your community. And also, if you have people visiting from out of town, how do they get to the library? If they Googled the library or public library near me, which you can do, see what shows up, and you can certainly think about how people are trying to find you. Okay, so another thing I talk about in the recommendations, of course, what you're doing well and then what to consider doing differently. 9 out of 10 times I'm always having to say use a sign template for all temporary signs, and that includes the library's name and logo. Also use consistent font on all signs. Also try to use acrylic sign holders. There are all kinds of different ways that you can make your signage look attractive. I also talk about viewing photos of the signs, but I also have developed a sign removal test. If you're trying to decide if a sign should be removed, take it away for 1 week. If no one says anything, if no one notices, if no one is breaking a rule, it's probably okay to go ahead and remove it permanently. So remember about doing that 1 week removal test and see if that's something that would work for you. Okay, so this is some of the images. A lot of the report is visual, so the branch manager or the staff members are able to see exactly what everything looks like out of context. And you can see here the book, the book drop, the book return obviously needs some work. And let's see. Business hours, one of the things I always look at are the business hours or the open hours. Are you able to see them from the parking area? Are you able to see them from the street? And you can see, you know, different signs everywhere. There's a lot of different fonts, and when you look at them this way, you think about them differently. Okay, going right along, I want to talk a little bit about customer service issues and library signage. A lot of times we have problems, and you know, maybe it's with a problem patron, maybe one specific patron. I think a lot of library branches have a good understanding of who their patrons are. But is a sign the best way to deal with some kind of issue or some kind of problem? Or is it something that you need to think about? Is it a systemic issue with the way your procedure is handled? About all different kinds of things. So before you put up that extra sign, think about, is this something that could be handled differently? Also, you have to think about, when was the last time your staff had any customer service training? Is there an issue that maybe you have too many signs about different issues or different procedures in the library that actually could be handled through regular customer service training? Does your staff meet on a monthly basis to go over issues or updates or things that need to be discussed? One of the things that kind of took me aback, and I'm going to show you in this next slide, and I'll read you these signs if you can't see them that well because they're pretty verbose, but I came across a couple of signs in a men's room, and I don't generally go into the men's room or the restrooms to look for signage, but if you know I happen to be in a restroom, I will definitely look at the signs. And so I was at a small rural library branch and came across these two signs, and I'm going to show them to you right now. One on the left was above the sinks, and it says, "To the person, because you are not a man who continues to defecate on the floor on a regular basis, please be advised that this situation is to stop immediately. If you continue with this behavior, I will station someone at the bathroom door who will enter the restroom with each and every person. Branch librarian." And then, leaving the restroom, there was another sign, again, all in red. Now, I do like that there is consistent font. I will say that. But this exit sign says, please be advised that alcoholic beverages are not allowed on county property. Leaving empty beer cans in the men's restroom is being monitored. No tolerance. And, you know, what is the first thing that you think about? You know, what kind of picture do you get of the branch librarian if you see these signs in the men's room? What kind of mental image are you getting, or what kind of, you know, are you getting kind of some negativity here, or, you know, what is it that is going on? You can tell, yes, the branch librarian is very frustrated. There are some control issues. But, you know, it kind of makes you think, yes, there's anger and suspicious activity going on, But think about if there's like maybe an 8 or 9 year old with his dad in the men's room, and he's looking at these signs and he's thinking, Dad, what does defecate mean? Or, I mean, thinking about all of these kinds of um, expressions that are being used in this signage. Um, so one of the things that I recommended is thinking about how could you, because this is a systemic issue, this is a problem that's going on in the library, and yes, it can make you feel unsafe, and yes, there's some kind of militant feeling going on. Um, but how do you deal with this kind of issue instead of just putting up some signs? And I thought about this maybe just only 5 or 10 minutes. And since it's a systemic change, here is one sign that you could put up. This restroom is for customers only. Ask attendant for key. Or you could say, ask circulation for key. You can lock the bathroom. You could put the key at the front door, at the reference desk, at the circulation desk. It can be just like at one of those gas stations. Um, so you have to think of, is this an issue? Maybe the bathroom is out of sight and there's no security cameras. You have to think of all of these different kinds of things. And yes, a key might help, but it might figure out the problem. And yes, a lot of additional work for staff, but is the restroom that busy that it would be a lot of additional work? It all depends on your specific situation. So you need to think of what would work best rather than putting up those angry signs. And I call those angry signs. And that's something that, I think we don't want to have the public, having that feeling of our anger. So that's something to think about. Okay, I want to kind of turn gears just a little bit. I want to look at some signage equipment and talk to you about things that are not necessarily expensive, but some ways that you can think about making your signage look a little bit better. There are all kinds of different things, acrylic holders, laminators, floor stand signs, outdoor signs. Um, so And by the way, the images that I'm getting ready to show you, I'm not recommending any specific brands. I'm just giving you the information to kind of let you know a general idea about how much these kinds of items cost. Here is a smart thermal laminator. $40, very inexpensive. You can get a thermal laminator or you can get a non-thermal laminator, relatively inexpensive. And by laminating all of your signs, you actually get a much more professional look. So that's something to think about. And some of you may have laminators. I actually went to one library and they had really nice vinyl lettering for their hours on their window, on their extra lettering for exit signs on glass windows. And I asked, I said, who's doing all of your lettering on your windows and doors? And she said, oh, we have a Cricut machine, and so we just are able to do our own lettering. Now, those can be a little bit expensive, but it's something to think about, and yes, I see someone is saying we have a Cricut and vinyl for our permanent signage, so that's maybe something that your library system would want to invest in. It's actually pretty easy to do, and a lot of us library folk tend to be crafty and enjoy our arts and crafts, so think of it as an arts and crafts project. Okay, acrylic displays. There are tons of different kinds of acrylic displays that you can get. There are acrylic poster frames. There are acrylic business card holders, countertop acrylic brochure holders, acrylic poster stands, literature displays, all kinds of things that you can find. And a lot of them are not terribly expensive. This is an 11 by 17 floor stand, which I have a couple of them here at the State Library. They work really well. The nice thing is that we also have a printer that prints 11 by 17, which is great. Not everybody has that, I understand that, but there are all different kinds of signs that you can make, and this one is very easy. doesn't have the price listed here, but it was about I think $115. Um, it works great. You can switch it from landscape to portrait, and the sign goes in quite easily. We actually put our listing of monthly events in this, and it's right near our front door, so people are able to see it. Outdoor signs. This one is about $118. The key with outdoor signs is please use them outdoors. I have walked into a number of libraries that have all of they have these, but they're inside in the foyer. You have to actually take them out to the street level so that people can see them as they're driving by, if your library is in a position that you can do that. Also, these banner stands are great. Some of them do tend to get expensive, but you can see, actually, I think since I posted this, some of the prices have come down. They usually come with a carrying case, so if you're doing any outreach or even setting up, if you have a bookmobile, and it's not too windy a day, sometimes these are great ways to get people to come and see you. Also, hanging signs with 10-foot chains, clear acrylic. These are easy ways, and you can see relatively inexpensive, $33. You can have signage that comes down from your ceiling so that you can either add directional signs or maybe change your directional signs, something that you might be able to do in-house. Window sign holder with suction cups, double-sided. These are easy and really nice because of the suction cups. You're able to move them around if you need to. If you're looking and see kind of what doors people are using and if anyone's stopping and looking at signs, this might be something that would work well for you. Lighted open signs. I think these are great. I actually have seen these at, I saw one at an academic library here in South Carolina and a few at some public libraries. And if your hours are posted, but they're very difficult to see from a distance, maybe it's a good idea to actually get a lighted sign. Sometimes these are sophisticated enough you can set them on a timer, but other times, you know, I mean, for as low as $27, you can have a lighted sign in your library window so that people will know you are in fact open and that you can come into the library. Digital signage. A lot of people think digital signage is way too expensive. You can actually get a 19-inch, which is kind of small, but depends on the certain area where you would think about putting it, $250. And a lot of these have the USB port in the back. You can upload a PowerPoint to it. It would cycle through all the images. So that's certainly something to think about as well. If you have an iPad in your library and maybe it's not being used, maybe you want to set up an extra station for a, the library catalog or something, just as a touch screen, you can actually get these for a little over $100. It's an iPad floor stand. It has a locked enclosure, so think about doing that. And as we're wrapping up, I know I wanted to leave some time for Q&A. Looking at some of the resources that are available to you. Of course, Flickr is a wonderful resource. You can look on Flickr for signs. You can, of course, look on Pinterest for signs. There are actually different boards of library signage. All you have to do is Google it, and you can actually find really some amazing examples of library signs. Also, the ALA has a PR Talk listserv. A lot of times you can ask questions about signage on that listserv, and it's, I believe, free to join. And then a couple of books that are pretty good. Kathy Dempsey, who I know personally, has written The Accidental Library Marketer. Got some great information there. And then also there is the Customer Focused Library, Reinventing the Public Library from the Outside In. So check not only your library catalog, but maybe the state library has these books that you could borrow and get some more information about your library signage. So with that, it's about 10 minutes till 11. I want to thank everyone for joining me today and listening to me rant on and on about the importance of library signage, because I really do think it is important to learn as much as you can and think critically about all of the signs in your library. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up for Q&A. And also I'm looking at the chat and someone's asking, how do you sign up for the PR Talk listserv? Interested in signing up. I think if you just Google ALA PR Talk listserv, it should probably take you to the ALA website, which has their list of different and I see we're switching over. Okay. Okay, so now I'm still seeing the chat. But yeah, I think if you just Google the PR Talk listserv for ALA, you should be able to find the page for that. Okay, looking at some of the other questions. With the iPads, just make sure they're the newer iPads. Yes, that's very important. Batteries can overheat, so think about that. Okay, thank you, Melissa. Listsala.org. There's the PR Talk link, so you can click on that to get to the listserv. Okay, good. I see someone can't wait to break out the camera and go take pictures. Yes, and you can get the staff to do this, as if you have a monthly staff meeting, or if you are doing something, just working with a few staff in the library. Pretty much everybody nowadays has a camera in their pocket on their smartphone or smart device, so go around and just take pictures of all of the library signs and then look at them out of context and see what you think about them. Okay, do you have any suggestions for large signage, like something to label fiction? I'm in a high school library. Some of those acrylic holders you can get 11 by 17. So if you can print 11 by 17, that would be a good thing to do. You can always put 2 sheets of paper together into an acrylic holder. Sometimes that will work. I would just kind of Google either the large hanging acrylic signs or 11 by 17 acrylic signs, and that might give you some ideas. Okay, could you share a PDF version of one sign of your sign audits? Yes, I will be happy to. I can email that to Paula, and we can certainly get that shared with you. Let's see, we have a brand new building and new self-check machines, which we have never had before. Library admin thinks we don't need a sign stating what they are. What do you think? Well, I think the question would be are patrons coming in, number one, using them? Are they able to figure them out on their own? Or is this something that circulation staff is actually getting a lot of requests, or maybe it's, taking a lot of time for them to step away from the circulation desk and go help? So that would be a thing that I would monitor for a couple of weeks and then determine what kind of sign you would need. And you may just need one sign that has 2 words on it, or maybe 3 words. I don't know, because it's hyphenated in some cases, but just do a sign that says SelfCheckout. A lot of people going into stores, I think, are familiar with what the process of self-checkout means. So if it has information on the screen, then just depends on that specific situation. But I would look at it for a couple of weeks and maybe make a better determination of what you think needs to go there. Okay, let's see. And there's someone mentioning we very seldom have to help at self-checkout. Yep, depends on what kind of system you have and where it's located. We have a building and people have a hard time finding their way around. What are good directional signs? A lot of good directional signs are, again, 1 or 2 words only, and also very big. So, the nice thing about having those floor stand signs is that you can move them around. You know exactly where patrons are walking, where the path traffic is going. So that's something that you only know the best where those signs could be moved to. You also want to use big arrows anytime you have those kinds of signs. We move ours around all the time, especially when we have events like we had yesterday morning and last night. We had 2 events, and we could move those signs around. So that's something that I would think about doing as well. Okay, how far away should people be able to read a directional sign? That's a very good question. I haven't ever gotten that question before. And one of those kinds of responses is it depends. It depends on what kind of vision the person has, but also whether or not it's relating to the architecture. If it is, reference or circulation or children's or youth or teen area, you want to have it probably big enough so that you could see it from, depending on the architecture, 50 to 100 feet. That's just a very random guess, but that's something that you just kind of have to measure and think about font size. A lot of times architects and builders will be able to provide that information. Let's see. I think are we probably not having many more. Okay, someone else had mentioned we had a 3-word sign and they took it down. We get a lot of questions. Not sure what that means. Oh, okay, that was related to the self-checkout. All right. And you still get a lot of questions, so yeah, it just depends. You have to be able to know what your community is. Let's see, if you do not recommend clip art, where do you obtain pictures for your signs? Okay, that's a very good question. One of the things you can do is go into the Google image search, and you can look for images that you can limit to ones that can be reused for non-commercial use. And any of those signs you can use. Usually Creative Commons is where you can look for those signs, and if you just Google copyright free images, then you'll be able to find a treasure trove of resources. Okay, let's see. Yes, Pixabay. Pixabay is really good. I've used that one before. Pixabay and Raw Pixel. I haven't heard of Raw Pixel. I'll have to give that a try. Vecteezy. Yep, Vecteezy is another one. Great, thank you. Yes, Canva. I use Canva a lot. Generally, I tend to upload my own photos that I actually just take a photo of. But if you have never heard of Canva, I definitely say go to canva.com, and they have all kinds of templates. Also, Adobe has one, and I think it is called Spark. And so if you go to Adobe Spark, you can set up an account, a free account, and helps you make some really nice signs. Yes, and Melissa, photography is a hobby. Take photos for many of the signs she ends up doing. So yeah, you take your own photos. You've got lots of great examples. And yes, Hillary's Adobe Spark is great, so definitely try that. Well, I think we are closing in at 11 o'clock. So if anyone wants to, you're certainly welcome to contact me directly. I'm certainly available to respond to any. Feel free to call me, even if you want to talk through something about your library signs. And if I can help and I'm available, I'm more than happy to. And thank you. There's my email address, crogers@statelibrary.sc.gov, and I will be more than happy to try to answer any questions that I get. So I think I will go ahead and wrap it up. Paula, do you have anything to finish out with?
Yes, just want to definitely thank you so much, Dr. Rogers. Also, I think I put in the chat that if people did have problems with their LEU, that I will be sending out an email probably within the next 30 days. I've got some presentations and other things coming up, so I won't be able to get to it right away, but definitely I will be in contact with you. we'll hopefully get a copy of the PDFs and maybe a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation. So that would be wonderful. Thanks again. Thanks,
Thank
everybody.
you. I enjoyed it.